Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we attend a committee hearing discussing a bill proposed by Representative Christian Mitchell that would create a constitutional amendment allowing for a progressive income tax. Then, at about 10 minutes from now, we attend a press conference where Representative Mike Fortner, along with others, discusses his proposal to provide a stopgap of funding for higher education during the state budget impasse. Following that, in about 30 minutes from now, we talk to Peter Schenke, chairman of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, about the business of fantasy sports and legislation that considers fantasy sports gambling as opposed to a game of skill, thus negatively impacting the industry. Then at about 40 minutes from now, we talk to Larry Morrissey, the mayor of Rockford, about the request for a tax credit extension of the River Edge zone. Then at about 50 minutes from now, we talk to Knox Williams, president of the American Suppressor Association, about legislation that would allow for the sale of gun suppressors. And finally, in about 1 hour from now, Rich Miller, the founder and CEO of Capital Facts, discusses the causes and implications of the state budget impasse. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Don Schaefer, Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association. We represent over 2,700 member companies in 15 states who operate in Illinois. These men and women are responsible for keeping the food in your store, the fuel at your gas station, and bringing the books to your schools. In fact, look around the house and virtually everything you see will have been moved at one time or another by a truck. That's why our issues are your issues. Whether it's the taxes they pay, the price of fuel, or the regulations truckers must endure, in the end, you, the consumer, pay the price. That's one reason why I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. Just as truckers deliver the goods on our nation's highways, the Illinois Channel delivers the information you need on your information highway. The Illinois Channel reaches 1.4 million cable homes across the state, as well as making their programming available as a video stream on their website at illinoischannel.org. Delivering the goods is Midwest Truckers' business. Delivering the information you need to stay connected to the actions of state government, that's the Illinois Channel's business. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we attend a committee hearing discussing a bill proposed by Representative Christian Mitchell that would create a constitutional amendment allowing for a progressive income tax. This runs about 10 minutes.
Constitutional amendment, so be sharp, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I come before the committee to present House Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment number 59, which would send a question to the ballot that would allow us to eliminate the flat tax structure that we currently have in Illinois and ask the voters whether or not they would be willing to consider a different structure that would allow for a graduated rate, which would mean lower rates for lower incomes and higher rates for higher incomes. Currently, 33 states and D.C. have a progressive income tax, a fair tax. As many of you know, if we tried to impose the type of flat tax we have in Illinois nationally, you'd be to the right of every Republican in Washington. This gives us the flexibility to cut taxes on working families and ensure that revenue is based on ability to pay. Right now in Illinois, if you count sales taxes, property taxes, and other consumption taxes, middle-class families pay twice as much as a share of their income compared to the top 1%. This flexibility, assuming that the voters selected it, would give us the flexibility to finally design a tax system that is fair. That is all this amendment does, is put the option to the voters to elect a fair tax system. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Sullivan.
Representative, so there's two parts to the whole concept of going to a graduated income tax. Yours is the first part that has to happen first, and that is the voters have to decide whether they want to change from a flat tax to a graduated tax.
Correct.
And so from there, we have a trailer bill that has been passed out of this committee by Representative Lang, House Bill 689, that sets into statute what those rates would be. Is that a fair
That's correct.
discussion? Now, we had some discussions yesterday between the millionaire's tax and Representative Lang's bill and how that would work. I guess what was discussed is those could change over time. And so what is put forth to the voters as your bill is being discussed, should it make it to the ballot, and we're talking about this to the voters, we'll be talking about a top rate of 9.75 for that amount of money above $1 million.
That's according to that proposed rate structure, which, as you heard both from the sponsor and from the Speaker of the House, could potentially change if, for example, the Millionaire's Amendment had passed yesterday.
Okay, so anything could happen. We could add the millionaire's tax, and so the top rate above $1 million would be 12.75, or we could choose to change that if we wanted.
Or you could choose to lower it. I mean, that would be sort of at the will of the General Assembly.
Okay, so all this would be the will of the General Assembly. Yours is just procedurally to the people of Illinois. Do you want flat? Do you want progressive?
That's correct. It would be a
Okay.
ballot question.
We also had a couple other issues that went on yesterday to let the people decide how to tax themselves in regard to property taxes. Do you not think that's, I see that you voted against that. Why would we not give people the ability to raise or lower their property taxes?
So it's my understanding that the legislation yesterday was a property tax freeze, which, as I understand it, could potentially limit the ability of local governments to raise the revenue they need for the services that they require. I just don't necessarily think that's policy the General Assembly should be setting. That is, again, a freeze.
Well, the policy was well, we're going to just leave it the way it is, and if you want to change it, go to referendum.
Well, I think if folks wanted to lower it, for example, at their local government level, they could have done that as well. I think that we're a democratic republic. We elect representatives, and those representatives make some decisions for us. In this case, because of the way the Constitution is set, we cannot currently make that decision, and the voters would have a chance to change that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Keith Statz. I'm the director of the Tax Institute of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. We're here in opposition to the graduated income tax amendment. We believe that the current flat rate broad-based tax in Illinois represents sound tax policy that was wisely put into place by the drafters of the Constitution. This amendment would eliminate the flat rate requirement for individuals and corporations. It also retains the current 8-to-5 ratio in the Constitution between the corporate income tax and the individual income tax. And from this proposal, it's unclear how that ratio would continue to operate in a graduated income tax rate setting. Under the current structure, the more income you earn, the more tax you pay. The current structure puts forth a stable tax base. The graduated income tax rate, if it were adopted, would result in a more volatile tax base. High-income individuals and corporations have variable income rates, and this exacerbates the effects of recessions like we had in 2008, 2009. It's only necessary to look at the experience of California, which has had a graduated income tax for many years, to see the impact of that rate structure on the budget in bad times. One of the advantages of the current flat rate structure is, frankly, it makes it difficult politically to raise the income tax rate because you have to raise the rate on everyone. You can't just go in and increase the tax rate on the rich or on corporations, however you want to define the rich. And under the current structure, there are some things that are put into place to lessen the burden on lower tax rate individuals. I would point out the Earned Income Tax Credit, which provides a credit and a refund in certain situations for lower income people. There's also the exemption in current law for retirement income that protects low-rate seniors. business owners who structure their affairs as S corporations and sole proprietorships are going to be adversely affected by a graduated income tax rate structure because they're going to be taxed as individuals on the income from those businesses. And they're going to be subject to those high tax rates in good years. But in bad years, unlike the case of corporations, they're not going to be able to carry forward their net operating losses to the bad years to smooth out the income level between the good years and the bad years. The current legislative proposal that's out there, Senator Lang's bill, promises a tax cut to over 99% of taxpayers. But as has already been discussed, there is nothing that precludes the General Assembly from one, not adopting that proposal, adopting a different proposal, and modifying that proposal to increase rates and add brackets. And for these reasons, the Illinois Chamber of Commerce stands opposed to this constitutional amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Mitchell, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. As we wanted to talk to you about the proposal to change the state income tax from the flat tax that it has been written in the Constitution to a progressive tax. It's often billed as a millionaire's tax, but at what level of income were it to be changed in the Constitution, would a higher tax take effect?
Well, Representative Lang has a proposal out there that I support where people filing jointly, a married couple, for example, would not pay more until they've made over $750,000, which is a pretty good amount of money. The same would be true for businesses that file as individuals. But ultimately, what this is about, what we passed today, is about asking the voters whether or not they want to be able to tax lower incomes at lower rates and higher incomes at higher rates. And I think that the voters are going to say yes.
Why do this at all? What's wrong with our current tax?
Well, the current flat tax system we have is highly regressive, and what it means is if you are a middle income or low income earner, when you count in sales taxes, property taxes, other consumption taxes, in this state, middle class people are paying twice as much as a share of their income compared to the top 1%. That's not only wrong, it's also ineffective for the state because much of the income growth we've seen over the past decades has gone to top earners. We're asking those folks to pay a little bit more for the infrastructure that they and their businesses rely upon.
If that's the case, how would lower income people be taxed were we to go to a progressive tax? Would we change their tax structure?
So the proposed rate, according to Leader Lang, would actually lower taxes for 99.3% of people in the state, including lower earners who would, I believe, go down to 3.5%.
So marginally lower on their income. I guess it would still be, though, regressive to the extent they would still, the lower income people still be paying more on a percentage basis of their income than a higher income, right?
Well, the system would ultimately be one based on progressivity. And again, because you're talking about marginal income, the lower your income got, the lower your rate would be, as opposed to the higher your income got, the higher your rate would be. So I think it's a much fairer way to do it.
What about we won't keep you too much longer, the argument that it's going to have also an impact on some of the businesses, on those who are S-corps, change the ability so that it might have a negative impact. And some critics would say what we're trying to do is improve the business climate in Illinois, and this would take us in the opposite direction.
Well, if you are a business that's making $750,000 a year in profit, that all partners are making that much money, perhaps you're not so small. And what I would say is businesses disproportionately rely on infrastructure, roads to get their bridges to and from market, an educated workforce, a higher education system to turn out folks who are going to make more money and buy more of their products, as well as be better skilled workers. So we're asking those folks potentially, if this passes and if the voters decide it can work, to pay a little bit more for the infrastructure that they rely on and that the rest of the state relies on as well.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, from Springfield, we attend a press conference where Representative Mike Fortner, along with others, discusses his proposal to provide a stopgap of funding for higher education during the state budget impasse. This runs about 20 minutes.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I am pleased to be joined by, my name is Mike Fortner. I'm the state representative from the 49th District. I'm pleased to be joined by Senator Pat McGuire and a number of my colleagues from the Illinois House to talk about a proposal I introduced yesterday to provide a stopgap of funding for higher education. And it's important to say it's a stopgap. We know there's a budget impasse that has been going now approaching 10 months without a budget. And among our state universities, it's reaching a critical point. We have institutions like Chicago State University that have said they can't go on beyond the end of this month. Other schools aren't sure they can make it with enough revenue to make it to the fall. And this time of year is very important. This is when students are making their commitments to where they will attend next fall. So to make sure that there is the certainty that we can get to fall, get to the point where the schools can open again, and let everyone know that we will be open to provide our high-quality state university education. What I did yesterday is I filed an amendment to House Bill 2344, which provides for a 4-month stopgap funding for the state universities, basically going from May 1 till the end of August. That should give the certainty to make sure we can open in the fall, as well as provide us time to get a real permanent solution. The state universities are not the only part of higher education. We've got entities like the community colleges, and they need funding too, there's no question. However, the time pressure that is looming on us with May 1 is critical with the state universities. And we want to see all of higher education funded. But right now, this stopgap would provide the critical piece to bridge us across. Furthermore, in this proposal, there's a second piece, and that is, let's do 1 semester worth of the MAP grant. The MAP grant is what helps so many of our needier families, their students, be able to attend school in Illinois. Providing that 1 semester, again, creates that level of certainty that we can support that for at least 1 semester while we try to work out the larger issues of the budget. I have a third proposal, which is not yet in bill form and is not directly linked to the appropriation, which is to say, let's revisit how procurement works for the state universities. They work in a very different way than state agencies, and we've seen a lot of costs that have gone up trying to follow a mechanism that was not well suited to the state universities. It's an issue that they've been long looking for to get some relief so they can better manage what limited funds they have right now. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Senator McGuire to make a few comments.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Pat McGuire, State Senator from the 43rd District. I also chair the Senate Higher Education Committee. And I want to deeply commend my colleague, Representative Mike Fortner, for putting this bill together. And I'm proud to stand here in this and support this bicameral, bipartisan effort to keep all 9 of Illinois' public universities open and to provide financial aid over almost 200,000 students of limited means. So as chair of the Senate Higher Ed Committee, I've conducted hearings across the state to gauge the impact of the budget impasse on higher education in the state of Illinois. And I've heard from plenty of constituents of my own, students, parents, college presidents, instructors, and here's what's happening. There's been a loss of hundreds of jobs, blue-collar jobs, people that do clerical work, people that do groundskeeping work, people that do maintenance work at the universities have lost their jobs. There's also been a loss of programs. There's been a loss of professors. Last week, Larry Dietz, the president of Illinois State University, told me that recently 7 faculty members resigned their positions, announced that they would be leaving Illinois State University to take jobs at other institutions across the country. There's also been a really frightening decline in applications. Last week, Eric Zarnikow, of course, Executive Director of ISAC, Illinois Student Assistance Commission, said that the number of MAP-eligible students filing FAFSAs is down 14%. Now, we all know that the state a couple years ago committed to 60 by 25. That is, by the year 2025, 60% of Illinois' adult workforce would have some sort of post-secondary credential. We need that to compete on a regional basis, a national basis, and an international basis. We're slipping behind. We were on track to achieve that goal of 60% of the adult workforce having a post-secondary credential by 2025. Last year, we began slipping behind. And it's often been noted by Jim Applegate that we cannot reach that goal of 60% without non-traditional students earning post-secondary certificates. So again, I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues from the House, my colleagues from the other party, my colleagues from across the aisle, because what we need to avoid, I've mentioned the losses of jobs, of programs, of faculty. We can't lose accreditation. If any of our public universities loses accreditation from the Higher Learning Commission, we might as well put a tag on the toe of that institution. That would be a disaster for the people of the state of Illinois. Thank you.
At this point, I'd be happy to take some questions if there are any.
Mike, where would the funding come from? I mean, here the governor and your House Republicans were just critical of the Democrats for passing a bill that had no funding, saying you're making empty promises. How would this be any different?
The difference here is that we have a fund called the Education Assistance Fund. It is funded through income tax and certain gaming revenues. That fund, during the current fiscal year ending June 30th, will receive about $1.4 billion. And at present, there are about $800 million of obligations to help fund general state aid, education at the K-12 level against that. This is a special fund that is for educational purposes. Often goes both to K-12 and higher ed, and so there will be about $600 million in that fund in this fiscal year. The proposal I outlined will appropriate $558 billion, so the money will be there this fiscal year to sustain that appropriation.
That would be for this, which semesters are we talking about, 550 million?
Well, what this does is this creates a stopgap measure that can cover all the normal operating expenses, what's called the ordinary and contingent expenses of the 9 state universities for the 4 months going from May 1 through the end of August. So it's based on the idea that we're providing that stopgap while we continue to work out what should be a full budget to provide for the revenue for all the higher ed institutions.
This is just general operating funds to keep them afloat. We're not talking about MAP funding in particular.
Right, no, the MAP, right, there's both in this proposal. So the MAP funding is about $200 million of the $558 million, the rest being the operational money for the state universities.
And, okay, and then all of that, the 558.
The total of both of that comes up to 558.
And would the money be freed up by the Educational Assistance Fund from that fund in any of the legislation that's out there, Dirk and Redonio, that taps into these state funds, or the one that the House considered, Barb Curry's the other day?
I think there were various appropriations from the Educational Assistance Fund. This one is targeted uniquely and specifically at using what is now getting to be a fairly good estimate. We're only a little more than 2 months from the end of the fiscal year, so we have a pretty good idea of what should be available this fiscal year in that fund.
Now, you say $558 million, and after a while it starts to sound like a lot of money. How much would really make the universities whole when you consider that we're now completing a second semester of no support for universities and no MAP, and we're about to get into a third? What is that? How far does that $558 million go?
The proposal that was in Senate Bill 2046, which was the $3.9 billion kind of an omnibus spending across a number of different things, provided for an amount that was a little over $1 billion for the state universities. I'm providing for 1/3 of that amount, 4 months rather than 12 months. So the answer to your question is, to get the full amount that was in that proposal would be a little over $1 billion.
What are the chances that you appropriate 1/3 of a year and then you just move on to the next fiscal year's budget, that this is considered, maybe not by you, but considered done, and you move on to the next fiscal year?
Well, I hope that's not, because that's not the purpose of a stopgap. The purpose of a stopgap is to make sure there's a certainty so the universities can open while we continue to work towards, and I hope get a comprehensive budget that will fund all the agencies, including all of higher education.
What is the EAF normally used for? Where does that money usually go that you're taking for higher ed?
It usually goes to a mixture of K-12 and higher ed purposes.
But not general revenue for these places? What
No,
programs does it usually fund?
It often funds various general items from.
Well, I guess my question then is sweeping this fund, taking pretty much all that's in there and using it for higher ed, is that going to affect any other education programs that normally would depend on some of this money?
No, because we've already made the appropriations, which I said came out to about $800 million. That's the appropriations that have already been made against the fund. Typically, as part of the overall budget, the entirety of the fund would be appropriated for various educational purposes. We only had the K-12 bill that was signed last year. So that's the only thing currently making appropriations against the EAF. So this is now appropriating a higher education component of the EAF.
Has Governor Ronner indicated his support for this bill at all?
Yes, he has.
And what about the argument that other bills have faced where this is just piecemeal legislation, we need to pass, a complete budget?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the governor about piecemealing, but what we know is there are critical events with our state universities looming upon us, and that's why I felt, particularly talking with, there's the senator, talking with the senator, that we need to do something to make sure that we're getting the time needed to put together a full package, hence the notion of a stopgap.
Have you spoken to Chicago State and whether or not if this were to pass, they would remain open past their deadline that they've already given?
I have not spoken to them specifically, but it certainly is the numbers consistent with 4 months of operating as proposed for CSU.
Well, Senator Dale Ryder has indicated that he would vote for this should it come up, but he also filed similar legislation using EAF funds to pay for much of what you've talked about. His plan, he says, would take more need-based approach to doling out the money. Are there some universities on this list that maybe don't need as much? Obviously, all are hurting, all need the money, but is need-based something that's missing from your plan?
I haven't looked at Senator Ryder's plan, so I'm not in position to make a comment on that.
Would a need-based approach be better served than a straight 1/3 of the entire year funding?
Well, I think you'd have to look to see in detail what we're talking about, and the key is we want to make sure that there is the certainty of opening the fall. If that requires looking at numbers a different way, we need to do that. But what we want to do is make sure that everyone knows our universities are going to be available for the students this fall.
Yes, April 1st is an important day, or May 1st is an important day, and opening in the fall is important. Obviously, parents who are considering college for their kids are thinking of it as a 4-year thing, not just a, one semester thing. And looking at all that's happened in the last 10 months, who would have foreseen this? So, what confidence do I have that this is going to be a multi-year thing that'll carry my child to hopefully a degree?
Well, all I know right now is we're looking at a crisis where there are universities that aren't able to make any kind of statement that they will be able to be open in the fall. And stopgap is not an ideal. A full budget's the ideal. But this at least gets us the time to try and get something worked out so that we can make sure that everything is funded the way it needs to be.
And as a parent, would you send your child to a public institution in Illinois this fall?
I am doing that actually. My son is a student who is enrolled now and will be enrolled this fall at Illinois Public University.
Which one?
All right.
Northern Illinois.
Mike, so you have hopes of getting this done by the end of this week? Is that possible?
It is possible, and I hope that we can, because that will, May 1. We won't be back again after this week until after May 1st.
So the House and the Senate this week?
We can do it. We've done it with other bills before. I don't know if the senator wants to speak from his chamber.
I sought to pre-file for the bill this morning and learned that Senate President Cullerton has already pre-filed for this bill. So he's reviewing it. I know there's discussions occurring within all 4 of the caucuses to build support for this bill.
What about community colleges?
Well, Community colleges, of course, receive local property tax revenue, and property tax distributions are at their most plump in May and June. So they will be receiving some property tax revenue, whereas our 9 public universities will not.
So, Mike, if I'm looking at this from a bird's eye view, this is basically to hold universities over for 4 months in the hopes that you guys will have at least finally hashed out something by, let's say, August or September at worst. In good faith, you guys want the universities to continue to stay open, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But, I mean, this is what, almost 10 months? By that point, we'll be past a full year. I mean, how hard is it for the universities or community colleges, whoever, to say, I can't take your good faith anymore. I've already taken good faith for 10 months. I can't hold out any longer.
Well, I think that, that's a question for the universities that you've just posed. From my perspective, I think there is a will to try and get something done. Certainly a lot of the members have expressed that we want to see a budget, and we want to see the negotiations that bring us to that point. This is not a tenable situation, but I think a stopgap is the best we can do this week. We're not going to get a whole budget this week, but I think we can get this done this week.
And when you say bipartisan support, does that include the House? Because I see a whole lot of Republican House members, but I don't really see anybody from the Democratic side here.
I've had discussions with some of my colleagues in the House Democrats. They've asked good questions. No one has signed on the bill, so.
Does that mean they support it, though? I mean, they're having discussions, but have they given you actual bipartisan support of this?
I haven't had any specific support from any member of the House Democrats.
Do you think if this passes this week, that parents will decide that, oh, I can trust Illinois and I can trust sending my kid to, Western or Eastern? Do you think this will make that kind of a difference?
Well, I think what it does show is that we recognize the importance enough to pass this kind of measure, and that this kind of crisis, should it happen again, which I hope it will not, will again engender this kind of response from the legislature to make sure that we stay open.
Is procurement-based procurement excused from that, be relieved from that? Is that legal? I mean, isn't part of that how we got into the whole mess to begin with a few governors ago?
Well, when we passed the reform, the universities always felt that the model of procurement that we used for the state agencies, when we made those changes, wasn't really the best model for the state universities. And it does run up their costs. They don't function the same way as a state agency. And trying to put them under the same model, it does cost them more. It hurts their ability to manage their money.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right.
Next, from Springfield, we talk to Peter Schenke, chairman of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, about the business of fantasy sports and legislation that considers fantasy sports gambling as opposed to a game of skill, thus negatively impacting the industry. This runs about 10 minutes.
Peter Schenke, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. One of the issues that is being considered here in the state capitol today is the whole issue of online betting and fantasy sports. There's a lot of people who are very familiar with this, and there's a lot of people who aren't. First of all, why don't we just start before we get to the legislation? Tell us about this industry, how long has it been around, and just what is it?
Well, fantasy sports have been around in Illinois as a commercial business for over 20 years, and there have been paid contests where you can play and win money for over 20 years. And so, recently there's been a lot of advertising and growth in daily fantasy sports. DraftKings and FanDuel are the companies, but it's a much larger industry than just that.
So, I know some of the younger people have fantasy sports teams. They pick their players. How does one participate in this? And I don't mean technologically, but I mean, what's the purpose of it? Instead of having like rooting for the Cardinals or the Cubs or whatever football team you follow, you actually put together your own team. Isn't that how it works?
Right. So the best way I would describe it is that it's a way for you to be a GM, right? My dream job is not to actually play center field for the Cubs. It's to be Theo Epstein and be the GM and pick the players. That is fun, and that's what fantasy sports kind of simulates. It's the ability to pick a roster and pick players, and I saw that guy play one time. He's going to be a star. I'm going to have him on my team, and my team is going to be better than your team. And it's a competition among other individuals, and that's kind of the genesis of it all. And over the years, there's a variety of ways to play. You can play head-to-head, and then daily fantasy is just the new evolution for that. You can play it for a shorter duration instead of a whole season. You can play one day in baseball or 1 week in football.
So how many companies are there within the industry that are making a business out of it?
So the Fantasy Sports Trade Association has over 300 members. There's over 120 game operators. And, it includes the major media companies like ESPN and CBS, and also some smaller startups. The National Fantasy Baseball Championship, which is his parent company is headquartered in Chicago. So it's a wide variety of small and large businesses.
So two of the names that we've seen advertised, although now I'm not sure if they're allowed to advertise or where that stands. One was FanDuel and the other is what?
DraftKings. So daily fantasy sports has evolved in the last 2 or 3 years and really became a big part of the industry the last 2 years. FanDuel and DraftKings raised a lot of capital, a lot of money, and they had a successful product, and so they advertised it. There was a lot of advertising, and unfortunately, that's brought a lot of scrutiny on our industry from people that don't really understand fantasy sports. They think it's gambling, and that's caused some states for the legality of fantasy sports, which was always assumed to be a game of skill, and I argue would be. It's been called into question, and that's what's happened here in Illinois. So
well, let's then get into, is it gambling? Or you're saying it's not gambling; it's a game of skill.
Yes,
And before we dissect that point, how does one make money in this process?
There are entry fees, and you can win a tournament, no different than like a bowling tournament, right, or a golf tournament. You go down to your local bowling alley. You pay some money. You compete in the tournament. The top guy wins a prize, right? And so very similar for fantasy sports. You enter a contest. There's an entry fee, and you can win a prize if you're the top competitor. And that's how it works.
So everyone, I'm just making these numbers up. Everyone who participates might say $10 to enter.
There's a variety of different ways you can play. So the most common way to play is you and your friends sign up on a league on ESPN or Yahoo, and on the side, you have a pool of money, and whoever is the winner wins that money. But then there are also commercial enterprises that allow you to play. So you don't have 10 friends to join a league. You can go online and play. So you put in $10, and then the top prize is like $80, and at the end of the season you win. And daily fantasy sports is another iteration of that, where it's just one day as opposed to the whole season.
Now, am I correct that a lot of friends will form their own pool and just kind of do this on their own?
Yes, that's definitely true.
So what's the role of and I want to get to the legislation here in Illinois, but for those who are totally unfamiliar, as I am largely with this, I wanted to kind of lay the foundation. So we get to the point, so now people said, hey, instead of it just being kind of piecemeal and friends doing this from college or something and going together, so I may not have other people to want to go in and do it with me, but I can therefore join and go through these organizations that you represent.
Right. Or you might say, wow, I'm playing with my friends, but my friends aren't really good competition. I think I'm really good at this. I'm going to go compete against the best players in the country. So you could join a contest like the National Fantasy Baseball Championship, where and you can win a lot of money. You go against a lot of really smart people who take it seriously, and that's fun competition. No different than like golf. You might play golf at your country club or your local golf course, but there are some people who say, well, I want better competition. I'm going to go enter the qualifier for the U.S. Open, or I'm going to try and make the PGA Tour. Very similar.
Yeah, and it increases, I would say, the interest in the sport if we look at the Cubs that everyone knows have gone, over a century, have gone 70 years without winning a pennant. But you could have picked over the years someone like an Ernie Banks or a Ron Santo on your fantasy team and been excited about what they were doing as individuals, right, along with other people that were on your team who might actually be playing for Pittsburgh or the Cardinals or something else.
Right. Since it takes a lot of skill, you really have to research all the players on all the teams. So you need to know the fourth wide receiver for some team that's not in your state that you don't follow, or the backup catcher, the fifth starter. makes you a better fan, we like to say, because you have to know all the teams. And that drives consumption of media and also of the sport. You're interested in a game. If you live in Chicago, there's an American League game that doesn't involve the White Sox, and you're watching it closely. And so the leagues love that. It causes people to watch more games, to watch them more intently, and so that's why the leagues are behind fantasy and daily fantasy sports.
Now, you're here in the state capitol because you're wanting what from the legislature?
So there was an attorney general opinion that fantasy sports is gambling, and so while it's just an opinion and she's not going after any company, that's led to some uncertainty for our industry to be able to operate in Illinois. So we're seeking legislation that will clarify it's legal, and also add consumer protection measures that the industry has advocated. And then also if there's any fees, have a structure that works for smaller companies in addition to just the DraftKings and FanDuels, which have grown very large.
And I'll say for the viewers, there's a demonstration going on for higher education, so that's all the screaming in the background. So the Attorney General is saying this is gambling, and again, just your contention is because people pick the players on their fantasy team based upon the research they did. It's not an arbitrary game like a ball bouncing around on a roulette table. Right?
Yeah, exactly. There's no turn of the dice or turn of the card. You have to win to even play fantasy. It takes a lot of work. You got to know all the players, the fourth wide receiver, the fifth pitcher, and so it takes a lot of work. And to win, it takes a lot of skill. The people who win these games put in a lot of time. And they just have innate abilities to pick the right players and have the right strategy. So it's very different than gambling, where you go to the casino and you put down some money and the dice are rolled, or the slots come up and you either win or you don't.
So the legislature would pass a bill that would clearly say this is legal to do? Is that what you want?
So it would remove the uncertainty that's come up in the state, clarify it's legal, and add a lot of consumer protection measures. And it's a bill that some of our members, it has some things that are difficult for them. It's gonna increase their cost of business, but overall, it achieves those goals and allows us to operate and flourish in the state.
It seems to me there are at least a couple of issues here. One would be Illinois already allows gambling in any number of things. I mean, whether it's horse racing or playing the lottery, which truly is a game of chance. On the other hand, your issue that it's not gambling because it's based on skill. Wouldn't that then say that horse racing is not gambling because I can pick the horse based on research, or that playing poker wouldn't be gambling because I'm good at cards? I mean,
so horse racing, they have different integrity. We're fantasy sports. We don't feel it's gambling, but there's money involved. It just doesn't fit into the same slot that gambling does because it's different. And one of the reasons is, for example, with the horse racing, fantasy sports doesn't have the integrity issue that horse racing has. There's no house. You're going against other players. We don't run and organize the track so that we can manipulate the horses or the jockeys or something like that. We just take entry fees. It's a competition between two players, and it's about NFL games or other sport games that are being run that we have no control over. So those integrity issues are not there. And that's why Major League Baseball and the NFL and all the major sports leagues like fantasy sports endorse it, often operate their own games on their own websites, or haven't even invested in DraftKings and FanDuel. Those integrity issues are not there.
Not to keep you too long now, but what is in it for the state of Illinois? So, by the way, your association is headquartered, the National Association, yes, right, is headquartered in Chicago. Is there money that would come to the state? Where the state is obviously starving for revenue. Right. Would it mean anything financially to the state?
So, I mean, first of all, there are over 2 million people that play fantasy sports in Illinois. So without the passage of this bill, fantasy sports won't continue in the form that it has now. A lot of people are not going to be able to play an activity that they like. So that's one of the first things. As far as what it does for the state, there is a tax component. And I think that, while no industry likes to be taxed, I think that we're willing to go forward with that because it's a good bill overall, and the tax rates are fair and equitable, and they're going to allow our industry to continue. And it will add to the...
What is the rate that would be?
There's like a sliding scale. Up to
and is it on the winnings, or how? Or is it how is it taxed?
It's on the earnings of the company, on the earnings of the companies.
A FanDuel or whatever.
Yeah, so the money that they're earning in Illinois from Illinois residents. But it's not going to add significant tax revenue. We're not that big an industry. We're a $4 or $5 billion industry. We're not like casinos. This is not a revenue generator that's going to solve the Illinois budget crisis by any means. But at the same time, it will contribute significant money to some money to the state, and that'll be a benefit for the state.
And you testified today before a House committee hearing. How did that go?
It moved on past that committee, and hopefully it'll keep moving and be voted on the floor at some point. But how and where the legislature works, I'm not the expert on that one. So.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. Since 1985, we've worked to educate the public and those who serve as trustees and pension boards about issues that impact the financial health of publicly funded pensions. Our members manage over $18 billion in pension assets. That's a huge number. But we never forget those dollars belong to the men and women who've worked as firefighters, police officers, and as educators. We want them to know that their pension dollars are safely invested. They also want to know that someone will keep an eye on legislation that could threaten their pension. And that's why the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association is fighting against laws that would reduce the pensions earned by our members. And this is why we support the work of the Illinois Channel. Their unbiased, in-depth coverage of the pension reform issue allows us and our members to hear arguments on both sides of the pension issue, to follow legislation as it moves through committee, or to hear unedited interviews with key lawmakers as they discuss what changes are being considered. Pensions are very important. They're also very complex. Pension reform can't adequately be covered in sound bites. But the Illinois Channel provides a connection to the Capitol, the governor, and lawmakers that we all need to stay on top of key issues. Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Larry Morrissey, the mayor of Rockford, about the request for a tax credit extension of the River Edge zone. This runs about 10 minutes.
Mayor Larry Morrissey from Rockford, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. You were just down here today testifying before a committee of the legislature, and what was it you wanted to tell them?
So today I joined 4 other cities in Illinois, our River Edge zone communities, asking for an extension of the River Edge redevelopment zone historic tax credit. It's been a really important tool helping us to revitalize our central city. The tax credit, it can be monetized, and that's been enabled us to get deals done, projects moving forward that we simply wouldn't have been able to do without it. We don't want to see that momentum end. We want to continue it in the next 5 years. If the extension is granted, could be a great opportunity for us to continue that progress.
And just so people understand, this isn't impacting just Rockford. This is river development, so it would be going along, whether it's in Peoria or the Quad Cities, any number of places across the state, and have been used successfully.
It's 5 cities, so it's Rockford, Peoria, Elgin, East St. Louis, and Aurora. Okay. So the 5 of us have a lot of similar attributes in being cities that have really been hit hard now for decades because of the change in the global economics, really. But we were especially hit hard after the Great Recession hit in late 08 and 09. And our story in Rockford, we've lost about 30% of our overall tax base. The property tax rate's gone up extremely high. Even though we haven't raised taxes the last 3 years, our property taxes haven't been raised. But the reason this bill is needed is that it's critical to get deals financed, because you can't go to a bank, ask for a loan when you've got that big of a hit in your valuations. The cost of construction is much higher than the value of the property when the construction's completed. So this is the only way to be able to get deals financed. You ask for the bank to give a smaller loan, and you are able to bring in more equity because of the tax credits, and that's how you get your deal done.
So who would actually get the advantage of the tax credit? Is it some developer? Is it investors that are putting money towards these projects?
So it's really at the heart of it's the city. That's why we're advocating for it. And in our case, for example, in Rockford, we've got a lot of municipal-owned properties that are brownfield properties. We're sort of the developer of last resort. We then team up, and in many cases, we're actually putting out RFPs, inviting developers to partner with us on these troubled properties, and then we use as one of the carrots to incentivize the deal to be able to get financed the existence of the tax credit.
How have you used it up to this date?
So we've got two projects that have been completed that we could point to specifically to talk about the benefits of it. One of them is a $12 million project right on our riverfront. It was the known as, not today as the Prairie Street Brew House. It was originally Rockford Brewing Company, built in the late 1880s. That project today generates a lot of jobs, retail. It's a mixed-use development with also commercial office space and housing. We've got another project that was completed, which was actually a couple of buildings right on our East State Street downtown corridor. Again, mix of retail and housing. And then one project that's under construction that is a $12 million project, which would be an adaptive reuse of an old building, downtown office building, into 62 apartments and some retail space. That being said, we have a number of projects that are at risk that we hope to move forward, including a $65 million project that's part of it financed with historic tax credits. It's an old Amrock manufacturing building, about a 13-story building, and adjacent to it would be a new construction conference center. So that hotel and conference center would be one of the single biggest privately invested projects in our recent modern Rockford history, maybe the biggest project, but it's one that it desperately needs the extension of the historic tax credits to be able to successful moving forward.
And you said Peoria is one of those communities.
Peoria is one of the communities, right? And some of the cities like East St. Louis, they haven't done any completed projects, but they're right on the verge, hopefully, of being able to do it. We probably had a head start from some of the other cities, but I look at a city like East St. Louis where they've really struggled. This is a desperately needed tool, and I love being able to support my fellow mayors and other communities that are doing their very best to try to make things happen in our communities.
I would just say I was in Peoria and looked at, went through and saw some of the new businesses that have opened along the riverfront. Sure. And you go to these communities. It's been a little bit of time since I've been to Rockford, but there's some really interesting and compelling places, just to go out and meet friends for dinner or a drink or whatever, and to on the other hand, as you've kind of mentioned, capture the charm of some of these older buildings that are really along there. To what extent have you seen then, does that help in a broader redevelopment beyond the direct investment into these businesses?
Yeah, great question. So all of us, as our cities, our 5 river edge cities, we lost a tremendous amount over the last part of the 20th century when urban sprawl and just dynamics of those days pulled a lot of investment out of our central core. We're finally starting to see reinvestment in our core, and the good news is the early signs that we're seeing, when we're capable, and we are, matching it with good infrastructure investments, improving our old state highways, for example, and making investments in our landscapes, our riverfront areas, we're able to attract new investment. So we really are entering a new phase, a proud phase of our communities. Cities like Rockford, Aurora, Peoria, East St. Louis, Elgin, all of us have a lot going for us. We shouldn't put our heads low. We should hold our heads high, but we need these kind of critical redevelopment tools to help us be successful. We have to be realistic with what the dynamics are in the marketplace, but I'm very hopeful, I'm optimistic, despite the challenges right now in the state budget process, that we can hopefully get a compromise and some of these bills that have been held up can move forward. The fate of our communities and throughout the state of Illinois depends on ultimately us coming together as a state, getting done what needs to get done so we can advance a prosperous agenda for all of us.
Let me ask you, so what's the downside? Who, if anyone, loses on this? And first of all, we're talking about the tax credit that's going to expire. Right. When would it expire? By when, therefore, does it have to be continued so that your development projects are not interfered with?
Well, the truth is some of the development projects opportunities have already been put on hold. We were working with a developer last year who suspended our development talks when we couldn't guarantee them that the program was going to get extended, and they just got nervous about not being able to complete the deal if it didn't get extended. So we hope to resume those types of conversations once we get the bill extended, assuming we do. In the meantime, what we're trying to do is make sure we give proper information and education to all of the folks in the State House, the State Senate, about this bill. We're talking to them about things like the fact that the University of Illinois
let me just specifically, so when did you say it expired?
end of the year, 2016, right? So,
and when do you need to have it done by?
Yesterday, a year ago, right? Because these deals,
we're already having these deals.
We're already losing deals. All right, so it doesn't mean we can't pick them back up. We are losing deals today because it hasn't been extended. So I understand we're in a tough budget situation, but that's why I'm here personally advocating. We need to educate as best we can our state leaders.
I'm confused on this. How does it negatively impact the state? Because it would seem to me, I mean, why not do this?
The fear you get is, hey, initially someone's getting a tax credit. That means they're not sending $1 to the state coffers. They're holding that $1 back in the form of a credit, right? The study done by the University of Illinois Springfield campus, commissioned by Landmarks Illinois, demonstrated that the state actually is getting about a 10-to-1 return on its investment. So for every $1 of tax credit, they're getting $10 back in the form of an investment to support tax revenues for the state of Illinois. So we really are holding on to that as the logical, rational basis to overcome the fear that it's going to be money out the door. What we've said is it's very rare to get this many mayors down talking about something on a common agenda like we are, supporting a tax credit. What they're more used to probably is hearing from an industry of some sort, some manufacturing or what industry it might be. But this is truly a community redevelopment tool. Yes, it's in the form of this historic tax credit, but we think it's a great thing for Illinois cities and our particular 5 cities for the state.
Before we let you go, Rockford's always had a bit, for a while now, it's like everyone's struggled, but I think Rockford perhaps more than some others. Therefore, to get some redevelopment going is even more critical. How high is the unemployment now in Rockford?
So our unemployment rate is typically about 40% higher than the state average. I believe it's still around that number. We have improved a lot from where we were, but we've got some systemic. We've got one of the highest child poverty rates in the state, one of the highest, if not the highest rate of abuse and neglect cases. Got a lot of folks living in public housing and affordable housing and just living in poverty in our community and struggling. So we're doing everything we can to try to rebuild the engine that we once had, creating a lot of jobs in our community. And this is simply one of the tools and approaches that we think helps move us down the path of improvement.
All right. Well, Mayor Morrissey, we appreciate you taking
Thank you
time.
very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Knox Williams, president of the American Suppressor Association, about legislation that would allow for the sale of gun suppressors. This runs about 10 minutes.
Knox Williams, president of the American Suppressor Association, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. About a year ago, we went out to a firing range with some other reporters and with Todd Vandermeide of the Illinois NRA. And the issue was so that the reporters could hear how a suppressor on a gun sounded. Now, the layman, such as myself, refers to them as silencers, and probably for a lot of us, the only connection we have are watching them in movies and TV shows. Let's talk about what is a suppressor and does it silence a gun?
Yes, sir. So a suppressor is basically anything that muffles or diminishes the report of a firearm. Also commonly referred to as silencers. But they reduce the noise of a gunshot by about 20 to 35 decibels. It's physically impossible for anything that you put onto a gun to completely eliminate the noise of a gunshot. There's far too many noise sources for it to do that. But they're able to reduce it by about the same level as common earplugs or earmuffs or other traditional hearing protection devices.
And the reason that we're talking is that there is an effort to pass legislation here that would allow for the sale of suppressors in the state of Illinois. How many other states allow for the sale of suppressors? People might say, why do you want to do that? Just so you can, unless you're going to join the mob, why do you want to have a suppressor?
Sure. So suppressors are one of the best and most effective ways to help protect recreational shooters and hunters' hearing. Most hunters don't wear hearing protection when they're in the field, and because of that, by the time you hit retirement age, if you're a hunter, you've almost resigned yourself to the fact that you're going to have to go out and buy hearing aids if you want to hear anything. By letting shooters use suppressors, this can help tremendously diminish noise-induced hearing loss, tinnitus, which is the constant ringing of your ears, and make shooting sports and hunting much safer endeavors.
And for those who are not into the gun sportsmanship, people will go out to a shooting range and might spend several hours out there shooting, right?
Yes, sir.
So when you're not using a suppressor, and if you're not using earplugs, you can, as you just mentioned, really damage your ear. What about the argument people might say, why do we need suppressors? Why don't we just have people use earplugs?
Well, people already do. You know, a lot of people do wear hearing protection, traditional hearing protection like earplugs or earmuffs. However, you still have high incidences of noise-induced hearing loss and tinnitus amongst target shooters. I just read a study recently that said if you're a regular hunter or sports shooter, that for every 5 years that you shoot, you increase your likelihood of permanent hearing damage by 7%. That's a pretty tremendous raise, and that's assuming that people are using hearing protection that's currently available on the market in the form of earplugs or earmuffs. And I know I sound like a bit of a broken record with that, but a lot of the times people don't understand how to get a proper seal. Using earplugs and earmuffs, their effectiveness is contingent directly upon you getting a proper seal either of your ear canal or of the muff around your ears. Generally when you're shooting, you're going to want to wear shooting glasses, something to protect your eyes as well. If you're wearing shooting glasses and you have earmuffs on, that creates holes in that seal. That reduces the effectiveness of earmuffs tremendously. And because of that, people can lose their hearing in that way. Safe hearing levels are based on both the noise level that you're exposed to and the duration that you're exposed within a 24-hour period. So even if you get that noise level down to what's considered hearing safe by groups like OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, it's still dependent upon how long you're out at a shooting range exposing yourself to those noise levels. So even if you have double hearing protection that might not always be enough dependent upon how long you're actually shooting.
When you use a suppressor and you're, let's say, at a shooting range and you're shooting for several hours, would you encourage shooters to also use earmuffs?
I do, absolutely. Especially if you're at a range and you're shooting multiple shots. If you're out in the field, a lot of suppressors will bring the noise level of a gunshot down to below what's considered to be hearing safe, and that's great. Any step that you can take to reduce the noise that a shooter or a hunter is exposed to is a step in the right direction, in our opinion.
And the other thing is, if you are shooting or hunting, the fact of the matter is you might be a better neighbor and not waking up the baby or something with your gunfire if you're using a suppressor. So.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. It makes shooters and hunters much better stewards of the environment and much better neighbors and considerate of their surroundings.
If this were to pass in Illinois, and again, I think there's 42 other states that have already allowed for the sale?
Correct. Yeah, 42 states allow for civilians to own and possess suppressors. Iowa was actually the most recent state that was signed into law back on March 31st of this year. And there are 39 states in which hunters can use suppressors in the field.
And if we looked at a map of the United States, what's the next nearest state from Illinois that one could buy a suppressor?
Every surrounding state.
So the only one from either of the coasts, I think New York doesn't allow it, California doesn't allow it, so we're like an island of a suppression-free zone.
Yes, sir. Illinois is an island.
If we pass this as a state, would it have, to your estimation, any economic benefit to the state?
Absolutely. There's a number of manufacturers within this state that I think would be introducing their own models of suppressors for sale. In addition, suppressors are one of the fastest growing segments of the firearms industry. Illinois is obviously missing out on that because they're not available for civilians to use. However, I think that if suppressors were legalized, you'd see a tremendous increase in folks going out to their dealers, pumping money back into their local economies, buying suppressors.
And we do have some gun manufacturers also in Illinois. I guess they could look to start a product line.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And then lastly, and I've heard of all the gun violence in Chicago and all the murder, and it's on the minds of a lot of lawmakers, especially from Chicagoland area. Do you hear from those that might say, we've got enough murders, and sometimes we only capture the bad guys because if somebody hears a shot and they call the police? What about the argument that someone could be murdering someone with a suppressor and then maybe no one hears about it and they just get away?
Well, first off, I'd ask them if they'd ever actually heard a suppressor in use. If you have, you know that these things don't silence a report of a gunshot, that the gunshot's still audible and outside of the context of shooting would be considered a very loud noise. I'd also ask them to look at the crime statistics. Suppressor use in crime is almost a statistical anomaly. The ones that are being used in crime are illegally manufactured. They're not registered with the ATF to begin with. And if this law is passed and signed into law, that won't have any impact. Those people who are going out there and making their own suppressors out of PVC pipe and tool and things that you can get at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, they're still going to do it whether or not civilians can legally do it themselves. All this does is allow law-abiding citizens to go out and purchase suppressors through the proper legal methods.
And do you know the legislation here that's trying to be passed?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you know the bill number?
I believe it's House Bill 433.
All right, Knox Williams, thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. For over 80 years, we've represented the interests of those who work in the Illinois trucking industry. We work with members of the legislature to pass laws to help make the roads safer, to help keep Illinois trucking competitive, and to help provide ongoing educational opportunities for those in our industry. The technology of trucking is forever changing. So too are the laws regulating the trucking industry. That's why the Illinois Trucking Association is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, which keeps citizens around Illinois connected to what's happening in state government and what changes are being discussed that will impact their families, their communities, their future. And the Illinois Channel gives those of us in industry an opportunity to share our thoughts on public policy with our fellow citizens across Illinois. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council on Transportation. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, Rich Miller, the founder and CEO of Capital Facts, discusses the causes and implications of the state budget impasse. This runs about 50 minutes.
Thank you for that blissfully brief introduction. All right, so I'm getting old, so I have to wear glasses when I write my speeches, and I have to wear them now when I read them. Hopefully, I'll be all right. I was almost late. I've been bringing my dog, Oscar, into the Capitol. Well, he can't go into the Capitol, so he stays in the truck. And it hasn't been hot out, and he loves being in a truck. And so when I was getting ready to come back into town, he thought he was coming with me, and he didn't want to go into his crate. So I cut it really, really close. Let's just get right into it, shall we? I'm sure you saw coverage, you may have even seen the speech by House Speaker Michael Madigan on the floor of the House this week. He spoke for 10 minutes. He read from a prepared speech. That's rare that he would do that. And that he would speak that long. And he railed against the governor. And mainly, he said, essentially, that Rauner intentionally caused the impasse, that he had been planning it for quite some time. And he had some evidence, some comments that the candidate Rauner had made a couple of 3 years ago. But there's some others out there as well. Almost exactly a year ago, the governor, already elected and in office for a few months, told the Chicago Tribune that he wanted to use the budget crisis as, quote, leverage to force through his reforms. So there does indeed appear to be some intent there. Still, I kind of doubt that the governor figured it would last this long. I mean, you know, we're almost in the fiscal year 17 without a fiscal year 16 budget. He did figure that it would last perhaps as long as August because he signed the education funding bill to make sure that schools open on time in the fall. But, man, nobody thought that we'd be here April 14th. I know it's April 14th because tomorrow is tax day. Today's April 18th? No, it's not. Please don't say that because then I'm 3 days late. But, I mean, also, the crisis began when the Democrats decided not to strip the tax hike, or not to stop the tax hike from rolling back before Rauner was sworn into office. They could have done that, and Pat Quinn said he would sign it if they passed it, and they didn't. And in retrospect, that was a huge mistake. They thought that they could roll this man. Here's this, you know, amateur hobbyist. No. Careful. And they might have thought he was an idiot, actually, but they didn't. That didn't pan out, right? If they had not rolled back that tax hike, or not allowed that tax hike to roll back automatically, we wouldn't be here today talking about the impasse because there would have been enough money to go around. Likely. Not definitely, but likely. Now, there are things that surround that as well. They didn't have the votes at the time, but, you know, you want to pass something, you can, if you really want to pass something, you can find the votes. But moving right along, there is another alternate theory out there. I hear it quite a lot, that the governor, well, that this impasse is deliberate for a different reason. We all know that the governor strongly believes, that Illinois is burdened with too much bureaucracy. Democracy, no, we're not. We're definitely not burdened with too much democracy. At every level of government, state, local, community college, whatever, universities, and he believes the unions have caused much of this problem. You know, he goes after the city of Chicago, Chicago Public Schools, Chicago State Universities, really all universities. He has railed against them all for being bloated. He has set up Chicago State. It's like flushing money down the toilet. He's also told me, several months ago, I confronted him with the fact that Illinois has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, per capita state employee ratios in the country. And he said, yeah, but look at all these social service agencies out there that we fund. It's a gigantic, he sees it, bureaucracy, okay? So, to some, the impasse is actually a tool to pare down or even hobble or even kill off, in the case of possibly Chicago State in a couple of weeks, bureaucracies. Now, I'm not really buying that. In fact, I don't buy that, partially because if you think about it, it would mean the guy is evil. And I don't think he's evil. He might be other things, but I don't think he is that. Now, I might be able to grant that he's not crying in his pillow every night about what's going on. except maybe when his spouse yells at him for allowing so many of these things to close. But a deliberate plan to kill off these bureaucracies, or I did it again, I don't know. I don't know. But whatever the case, at least a side benefit of this impasse is strangling some of the bureaucracies that the governor despises. That's a fact. It's what's happening right now. Now, the future. Despite all the gloom and doom, I'm actually kind of somewhat little, tiny optimistic here. Rank and file members have been meeting. More importantly, staffs have been helping these rank and file members and have been meeting amongst themselves. Staffs are controlled by the leaders and the governor. In the House Democratic Caucus, Madigan doesn't allow staff to, set policy like some others do. Keeps them on a pretty tough, short leash. But when he empowers them to do something, he trusts them to get that done. So could this work? I don't know. We'll see. The legislators backed down like that when Rauner pulled the plug on it last year. I think it was November. And they ran away. Just said, okay, we're done. They got back together again. They kept meeting. And now we're at a point where there may be some progress. Who knows? And then there's the speaker. And I don't think anybody in this room, including Steve Brown, who's the speaker's spokesman, knows exactly what Madigan is thinking. The good part is that the governor responds to pressure from Republican legislators. He doesn't like to lose, right? Winning is his motto, man. And so if he thinks he's going to lose a vote, like he thought he was going to with the Child Care Assistance Program, on the money for municipalities, he will adjust his position accordingly. And it's happened time and time again. Madigan also listens to his members, and if they pressure him, and they do speak their minds to him, contrary to popular belief, they don't all walk around like serfs. Some of them, maybe even most, but not all. And so his members could also hold a key. Senate President Cullerton is always willing to do a deal. He'll do a deal with that door over there. No worries about that. The two Republican leaders, Rauner's got millions. They want those millions for their campaign, so they are being very cooperative, let's say, with the governor's office. If it doesn't work, we're just going to have to wait, because Madigan's MO has always been, that's how we would say, you will negotiate against yourself until I am sufficiently satisfied that you are gotten yourself close enough to my position where then I will just spring in and make a deal. And sometimes it just comes right out of nowhere. Boom. And you look around and you go, wow, that passed. How the heck did that pass so quick? And that could very well be what happens on this, too. I mean, think if anybody tells you they know how this is going to end, or they know how to get it to end, they are either insane or Mike Madigan. On that note, I will take your questions. And I want to thank you first, wish you a happy anniversary, 10th anniversary. And this has been a real pleasure coming here, but I did want to save a lot of time for questions, and I didn't plant any, unfortunately, so ask away. Anybody got one? Come on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Somebody raise their hand.
Where are we as far as the Republican rank and file revolting from or leaving the plantation, so to speak, and putting a deal together aside from what the government?
I think there's subscribers will see more tomorrow. I think there's some of that going on, significant amount going on. Nobody's publicly broken with them yet. It may not happen until, let's just say, to the veto override situation of this bill that the governor, that Senate just passed after the House passed and sent it to the governor's desk. It's an appropriations bill, excuse me, for higher education, social services, back pay for state workers, et cetera. We'll see. That may be the next big test. I don't know. But there is a significant amount of unhappiness in that caucus, and that caucus really is, if they ever get it together enough to think about it, and I think some of them have, they really are the most powerful caucus, influential, let's say, in the entire building. They're playing a really good hand because they know every time they say, no, we're not doing that, and they stand up to him, the governor finds a way to make peace. You do that enough, you know, you start learning. Now, you can't do it all the time on little things or what have you, but they really do hold a significant key to ending this. The House Democrats also need to realize a little bit more that, you know, they're often content to just, you know, hang back and let the wizard do his wizardry. And, you know, we're way deep in a hole right now, and there needs to be more pressure there. I think there's some, but there needs to be more pressure there for the speaker to move. Brown would say there's no pressure. I would beg to differ slightly. Next question. Did I answer that? Yeah. Next question, sir.
Why does the governor not like the museum?
Man, I have no idea. I really don't. I got to figure that's coming out of the budget office somewhere, somebody over there. I don't know. Why do you make your stand on a museum that's been around for how many? Yeah, right. I don't get that. You're going to make a big statement on a museum. It seems odd to me. But, you know, maybe I'll ask him next time. That's a good question at a press conference. Why do you hate the museum, Governor? I don't think I'd phrase it quite that way. But, yeah. Why is there a bug up there? Never mind. Sam?
Rich, in light of this being a presidential year and that race usually having a big impact on down the ballot races, what effect do you think this whole crisis with the budget is on races for the General Assembly in November?
Well, it just depends on how weird the Republican nominee is. I mean, do we go into bizarro super weird with Trump, or just bizarro weird with Cruz, or, you know, or do they just go out and pick somebody else and upset a whole bunch of rank and file Republican voters, right? There's going to be enormous headwinds. This is not a good time for the governor to be trying to take seats away from the Democrats. He will pick up, almost 100% sure, he'll pick up a seat in Quincy. John Sullivan, state senator. That district is a John Sullivan district or nothing, right, or Republican. And unless they haven't even found a candidate there yet, right? So I don't know, unless they can convince some guy named John Sullivan, you know, because that John Sullivan's leaving. There's no doubt he's leaving. But they're going to have to. I mean, how hard could that be, though? There should be a lot of John Sullivans in that district. And just keep them quiet. So they'll get that. I think, you know, some other districts are going to be in play, but some Republican districts will be in play, too. I think there's some strings that they can pull on the northwest side of Chicago. There's a Republican district up there. The that might be in play. They have a pretty decent candidate. Whether or not they back her, I don't know. We'll see. I think, you know, on the other hand, as they constantly point out, the Speaker has the lowest approval rating and the highest disapproval rating of any statewide figure in the country, including that dude from Alabama, because it's Alabama. So, you know, Fire Madigan 1.0 didn't work. Fire Madigan 2.0 didn't work. Brown texted me. They tried. They tried using Madigan against our state senator here, McCann, and it didn't work, right? I mean, if it doesn't work in a Republican primary, you got to wonder. But McCann, you know, is a different sort of guy. Man was he ran what turned out to be a pretty brilliant campaign. Plus, he just works all the time. He's everywhere. I'm kind of surprised he's not here. He may show up eventually. Maybe it's because he had to pay to get in. That was a joke about his finances. Is this being recorded? I guess I should have asked that earlier. But I think, I mean, yeah, I think this could be, you know, people are not happy right now, man. You know, I had a post on my blog the other day, I don't know, how days all bleed together. Eric Zorn wrote a column saying that the governor was an epic failure. And some people on the blog, my blog, commented that the comments over in the Tribune were crazy nasty on Madigan. So, and against Zorn, I went over and looked, and there was like 250 comments, and most of them, almost all of them, were about Madigan and how Zorn was on Madigan's payroll or what have you, right? It's bizarre. So I posted a whole bunch of them, right? I mean, you can't base, you know, it's not like a poll, right? But there is no doubt that the speaker's, the perception of the speaker out there is a lot more negative than it is of the governor. But the governor's falling. Maybe one day they'll be equals. Wouldn't that be fun? Great, I totally failed state again. So, I mean, this is going to be a heck of a race, and I think he's got all the money in the world, right? So he can make whatever he wants an issue and burn it in, and we'll see. The Democrats have the manpower in the precincts, but we'll see. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Have you learned anything about that meeting, and if they have another plan to meet again?
I don't know too much about it. Mapes, Tim Mapes, the Speaker's Chief of Staff, I asked him about it. He said, oh, it was a love fest. I'm kind of thinking that was snark, right? But I think there was some, they talked about having, you know, staff get together. That's a positive thing. They need to keep meeting, though. This one meeting every 6 months stuff, or 5 months or whatever it is kind of ridiculous. And the last time they met was December, and the time before that was like, I remember, like August, you know, something. I have no idea. October? Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that one. That was wonderful. They had the one where it was broadcast live. It's a positive that nobody talked to the press, right? And I wasn't there around, and so you know, the reporters I think who were there were younger, and so in the past, what we always did when we had these under Blagojevich, when we had, you know, 1 million leaders meetings that nothing ever came of, people would cover both exits because there's a side exit to get out of that office. Then you sneak onto the elevator and poof, you're gone. Or the stairs, if you want to be healthy. And nobody covered that side exit. I think one reporter said she was going back and forth. I'm like, you can't do that. You got to have somebody over there all the time. But it was good that they didn't talk, because often when they come out and talk, it's either it's bad news, right? The governor's insane or whatever. That was the last time before last governor, not this one. But so when they don't talk, it's often fairly decent news. And so take it for what that's worth. Yes, sir.
What's happening with Fairmont?
The people are trying to put it on the ballot. I don't think, the speaker has not said anything kind about it other than it's a Republican plot. Yeah. He's called it a Republican campaign plot. There are a lot of Republicans that are trying to put that on the ballot. But he has a pretty good team of lawyers, so we'll see what their opposition is going to be. There will be. They will put that. They will try to put it on the ballot. They'll get enough signatures, likely, and they changed some of the wording around from last time, which made it more likely to be constitutional. But Mike Casper is a darn good lawyer, so we'll just see. Frank.
With the Attorney General now having in place a ruling regarding the employment of all the state employees, if she goes forward and pursues this, and there's a possible shutdown, do you think this might expedite?
There's some ifs here. First, the Supreme Court has to certify the ruling, right? That takes time. Then there's other things that take time. There's things, it could be quite a while before she's able to go to court on anything. If you saw my blog yesterday, the Department of Revenue had sent out to its employees a notification saying, with a frequently asked question list, and one of them was, am I going to get paid if there's no, if the court rules, right? And they said, you will eventually get paid if you come to work as directed. So apparently the government wants workers to come to work without getting a paycheck. That'll be fun. Good Lord. Wait, there was somebody. Yes, ma'am.
How effective is a union protest or a citizen rally at the Capitol, say, you think within the next 3 or 4 months?
You'd have to see something like Wisconsin, right? And organized labor really has kind of shied away from doing that here. But I tell you, the one rally that got results was when AFSCME flooded the fairgrounds, the state fairgrounds, a few years ago. You know what the result they got? Bruce Rauner. So they were all out there screaming at Pat Quinn. Way to go, boys and girls. Yeah, I'm going to let my alderman ask a question. Let me ask you, though, when did you say my street's getting repaved? Probably.
Rich, obviously there's a lot of egos involved in this thing, and there are
mine included.
There are issues there that could have some compromise. Why doesn't the governor take a couple victories and let's move on and fight another fight later?
Well, see, here's the problem has been, this is something I'm going to write soon, I think, because I've been talking to people about this idea that's brewing in my head. It's like, if you ever go out and buy something from a garage sale, right, or whatever, okay, or a house, or a car, or what have you, you have an idea in your head what price you're willing to pay for that, okay, say $100. I'm willing to pay $100 for that, and not $1 more. And the person who's selling that to you has generally an idea, even though it says $150, right, on the price tag, what that person would take, right? My bottom line's 110. I wouldn't take a dime below that. And then, poof, you get it at 105, split the difference, right? And you got a deal. This, though, situation has been over and over. I don't know exactly where it is today, but for months and months, I don't think that the governor really had it in his head what his bottom line was. What is the least he could accept? So it's really tough to negotiate. And on the other hand, I don't think that Madigan really had it in his mind yet, or maybe now he does, I don't know. But for months, I don't think he had it really in his mind. What is the most I'm willing to give? So if they don't even have those basic concepts down, negotiations are impossible. See what I'm saying? I forgot your question, but that was your answer. She had her hand up there, and then we'll come to you.
I'm just kind of looking at, you talked about the outcome of trying to minimize bureaucracy, and so I was wondering about the strategy of, as nonprofits and other organizations are having less and less money from the state, and then more people are stepping up to support that, whether there's a strategy to move everything to a public-private partnership in which there is more ways to run things like businesses.
Well, it's already that way. I mean, most all of our social services are, state workers don't, except for like DCFS, okay, and Department of Corrections, they don't really deliver services, okay? We contract with these not-for-profits to deliver services. And that's really good because it saves us a lot of money. We don't have to pay them union wages, right? And the not-for-profits have to deal with that. And also because these not-for-profits, like Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, whatever, there's a million of them, they also raise money from charitable contributions to help run these things, right? So it's a great deal for the state. So this is already happening. My concern, right, is after Lutheran Social Services laid off 40% of its employees, we started seeing like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 instances where for-profit companies came in and took over these services. Now, in the long term, I don't think it's going to be cheaper to go through for-profit companies because, I mean, one, they got to make a profit, okay? Whereas, you know, Catholic Charities doesn't have to make a profit. Two, they can't raise money through charitable contributions because they're a for-profit business. And three, how much lower can the pay go in these places, right? I mean, you have some of the kindest, warmest-hearted, hardest-working people in Illinois working at delivering these social services. And they work for peanuts. And so what are we going to do? We're going to hire people. Who's going to do it? It may end up costing us a lot more, but it puts money in people's pockets. That's what I'm really worried about, what could happen with this, that we drive these charitable groups out of business. And we have to turn to for-profits to pick up the slack, which will cost us, I believe, more in the long run. Can we do this and then, go ahead.
Rich, are there any serious discussions taking place on potentially moving the state to a 2-year budget cycle?
I think, you know, I keep hearing this more and more. People keep talking about this. Even one of the Republican leaders, no, I don't remember. Oh, I think it was Matt Murphy, I don't know, that talked about a 2-year process. Hearing it from both sides. I think it would be a good idea at least once, okay? This time, maybe even a 5-year budget, so we don't have to go through this crapola again. I don't think a 2-year budget is a bad idea, as long as you don't seal it shut, because things can change, right? I think it would give a lot more, you know, one of the problems they always have, school districts and these not-for-profits and everybody else, that, you know, construction companies and what have you, everybody who does business with the state, you know, every year is a struggle to figure out what the heck they're going to get, right? So it would be nice. I mean, it would really be nice if we had even a 5-year budget, but we tweaked it every year, right? Or a 4-year budget or what have you. We just tweak it every year a little bit just to make sure more revenues come in, you move the money around, less revenues come in, you know, you make your cuts. I think it's a good idea as long as we don't go to every other year sessions, because that would hurt my business, and I don't want to like that. Tom?
And we certainly would not want to hurt your
Heck no.
Have you explored for those vendors who have provided services or supplies or whatever, betting that the state will have a budget? If there is not a budget for FY16, what do those vendors do?
I mean, a lot of them are going to go under, okay?
Contracts say subject to appropriation.
Almost all of them. Not all, but almost all of them, especially in the social service world, right? So I think, you know, there's a lot of fear, for instance, that the governor's office is going to say, or the agencies are going to say, we need you to sign a new contract for next fiscal year. And people are going to say, what the heck? Check, right? I mean, I haven't been paid yet. But there's also a greater fear that what they're going to do is say, you're going to sign a contract for next fiscal year that included in that contract you agreed to accept X% less from the contract you signed last fiscal year. And if you don't, you ain't going to get a contract for next fiscal year, whether we have a budget or not, right?
Which then puts those folks
in a world of hurt.
Well, but it's automatically at the bottom of the list. If they stop supplying materials or services.
Right, and then they got to wait until whenever the controller gets around to paying them, because they're no longer a contractor, and therefore their need is no longer any of our concern. Official. Oh yeah, this ain't gonna end for a long time. I mean, you think about what's happening here. Not signing the budget, that the admittedly unbalanced House Democratic, Senate Democratic budget has cost us more money as a state than signing that budget, even without the revenues. We are further behind because we're on autopilot, right? So the Democrats had cut some $400 million out of Medicaid spending, okay? But he vetoed that, so that $400 million is continuing to be spent. The federal consent decrees are requiring money being spent without an appropriation, so there's no control over it. He has said, the governor has said, and his budget director has said, that he couldn't line item or reduction item veto budgets because, you know, some of these things, they're in statute and they've got to spend the money. Okay, I get that. But he could have done it on some stuff, right? What we've got now, I checked today, and we're at $7.8 billion in overdue bills at the controller. But that doesn't include the social service money that hasn't been appropriated, the university money that hasn't been appropriated, and anything else that hasn't been appropriated, right? It's not included because it's not appropriated, so it's not in line, right? So there's a lot more out there above and beyond this. So then when and if we ever do get a budget and a revenue increase of some sort, they're not going to be able to pay that off. It's going to be like what happened the last time we had a tax increase in 2011, which is it took years. It was not until Quinn was almost out of office before that backlog got down to a rather fast payment period. It was pretty good, actually. And then poof, it all disappeared again. Just like that. I mean, we got everything together, right? And then the tax hike expired, and then there was no budget agreement. And, I mean, we are in a deep hole that's going to take years to get out of. Years. Unless we have a gigantic, huge tax increase. And, I mean, if you think that happens, you are insane. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Can you comment on the situation with AFSCME and how that's likely to all play out?
Well, that's the next bomb, right? I mean, they say that the union says that the governor has maneuvered them into a position of, blaming them for inaction when he's the one not moving. Does that sound familiar? He's really good at that. And he has declared impasse. Now, that has to be approved. And it has to be approved by a board that he appointed. Now, and there's a lot of debate, I think, within this administration. They're not the cowboys on everything that everybody seems to think on stuff. I mean, this is they go out on strike. How do you, you can't bring the National Guard in to run DCFS. Oh, thank you. I hope this one has vodka in it. Nope, it doesn't. Right? So who knows? There's a million things like that, right? And I don't know. But what he could do, he could have his board delay any sort of ruling, or even rule against him if he truly wanted to. I don't know. I mean, the fact that we haven't really heard anything out of what's going on, that might be good news. Or then again, they're not really talking, so that's no news is good news, I guess. But how many more crises can we have at one time? And that will be a big one, a real big one. So I don't know. And if that does happen, then we are going to see Wisconsin down here. I won't be coming into the Capitol very often. But I do have a parking spot, though, so yes.
Do you believe that the MAP grants and the higher ed budget will be approved before session ends or start the fall semester in September?
Well, one of the things that is, I think, and I didn't touch on it, is moving things along there, is the Senate President's threat not to send the governor the K-12 appropriate bill. Remember, that was the only appropriations bill he signed last year. And because he knew rookie governor, moms, kids ain't leaving their houses, right? There would be hell to pay, serious hell to pay. Cullerton has said, unless we get school funding reform, we ain't doing K-12. So, see you, pal. Don't want to be here. It's a school of thought, you get into Winnetka and you get things done, right? Which is, Winnetka is where he's from, so the autism cuts. Well, that had support from, every stratum of society, not the cuts, the program. And I'm sure you heard an earful there. There's also the child care cuts, right, which child care assistance program, his wife was very involved with that, so she lives in Winnetka too, so therefore Winnetka. The money for municipalities, right? So you cut money, you don't give any money to New Trier, and watch what happens. But it's not just New Trier, it's everybody, right? But the point is, it gets him where he lives. I think that's part of the thinking there, to try to move him off the dime. And I think that may be why we're seeing a little bit of movement here. One reason anyway, because they're definitely afraid. There are a lot of things that they care about that are shut down that they don't want to close. Who wants to see the University of Illinois, right, go under? But man, you close down the schools, AFSCME goes on strike, there won't be a room to stand within 5 miles of that building. You know what I'm saying? So I think that could really help move things along, even though it's playing his game, right? Which is not a really good game to be playing. It's rape victims can't get a counselor because a counselor is out of business because she's not getting paid by the state, so that we can get tort reform. It's not cool. It's not a cool game to be played. It's not a game for a lot of these programs. These social services, there's nobody else to go to. They're the most vulnerable people in the state, and we're peeing all over them, and it's just ridiculous.
Well, one more.
One more question, and then we can all drink. Or I will. Sam, you have one more?
Well, first of all, a comment. The labor board decisions, are subject to court review. The question is, can you say anything on the governor's turnaround agenda that Democrats could eventually agree to, or in some form or another, like maybe workers' comp reform, or I don't know, anything?
Look, they have to find he's not just going to give up, okay? He's not. Even with the schools, he's going to try to find a way around all this. He might go to the courts and try to get schools funded, right? Which would be a really weird precedent. But, what the heck? They're funding everything else. In any negotiation, right, you have to let the other side feel like they've won something. Madigan knows this because he's been in a million negotiations. Sometimes when he's been in these negotiations and when they're over there, I was like, what did Madigan actually come out of this with? It doesn't look like he won much. He got something. I just wasn't sure what it was all the time. Sometimes I was sure. But you got to give them a way out. And this is where Madigan has to accept some responsibility here. He is focused on things, and workers' comp, for instance. He's focused on the governor's proposal, which it's a non-starter with him. But there are other ideas out there. But he has until now, I don't know where his head's at right now, but he's refused to entertain those ideas, including one for me, right? That would save a bunch of money and really wouldn't hurt that many people, even the trial lawyers, right? So I think there needs to be more of this, but he is where he is, and he's going to be facing tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars this fall, and he's going to need organized labor to do that. And so it's kind of ludicrous it's understandable why the governor wants some of these reforms, because lots of other states have them. And so I get that. But to say to Madigan, okay, upset your base, your financial base, right? And then I'll let you vote for a tax hike in a year where everybody's upset, right? Trump and Bernie and, and by the way, I'm going to spend $35, $40 million against your candidates after that's all over, right? Oh, yeah, great, wonderful. I'll agree to that deal today. It's ridiculous. So they have to find another way. And, I'm not the big brain, so I don't know. I don't know what that other way is. But they have to. We got to figure a way out of this stuff. Or because this is, you think it's bad now, give it another month. Right? God, it's just getting worse by the day. So anyway, thank you again for inviting me. I'm sorry if I was depressing. What the hell, it's Illinois. I've been depressing for 10 years.
You're watching the Illinois Channel.
Hi, I'm Delitso Solomoyo, President of the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies. We are an organization of 36 member agencies located around Illinois which provide needed services to our fellow citizens. It may be helping provide services at a homeless shelter, or helping to provide affordable utilities to low-income people across Illinois through such programs as the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, better known as LIHEAP, or working with rural communities and helping them maintain needed community infrastructure. These are just a few of the many services provided by Illinois' community action agencies. But to provide these services efficiently and effectively, we need solid information. That's why, in addition to heading the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies, I am also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. I have watched the Illinois Channel for years. It provides serious coverage of the Illinois legislature, public policy discussions, and one-on-one interviews with leaders from across Illinois. It's the kind of solid, in-depth information all of us need to get beyond partisan politics and political spin and just hear directly what's happening, what's being proposed, and why. I know and you know that Illinois is filled with good people. But if we are to have good, effective public policies, we need to base those on good information. We get that from the Illinois Channel. That's why I watch it, and I hope you will too. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.